Welcome to class number 4, where we have a play on the words just do it for just Jew it. So this is Judaism's focus on actions. And we'll start with Eliyahu. If you'd like to read the introduction, you have it on page 66 in the student book.
Okay. Just do it. Judaism, sorry, I'm like having a really slow day. Judaism's focus on actions. Introduction. Jewish law can sometimes seem boring, repetitive, routine, and detail obsessed. It can make Judaism feel empty of drama or inspiration. Why does God care about what I eat, wear, and do? Why does Jewish law go into obsessive detail with every facet of life? Isn't it more important to have a good heart, be spiritually attuned, and connect with my soul?
Very good. So this is a great question. I would love to hear both of you in a short answer. What do you think would be the answer as to why, in my own words, is Judaism obsessed when it comes to small details? And the law, the Talmud, the Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law, discusses if you did the right first or the left first, if you ate 1 ounce or less than an ounce. Most people would say, what does it make a difference? Passover, eat matzah. How much matzah? As much as you want. Jewish law says, no, you got to eat a certain amount of matzah, about 1 ounce minimum. Why do you think Judaism is obsessed with details on every single law? Like Shabbat, a day of rest, there's many books just describing the laws that are allowed and prohibited on that day.
Well, I think that when we like make an effort to do those little things, we're showing that we're listening to God's words, and every little thing like makes a difference. Like doing little mitzvahs, just little things here and there, they still make a difference. They still like get us closer to like Mashiach and other things. So it's showing that we're making an effort and we care about what God has to say, I guess. That's just my interpretation.
Right. No, very good, very good. And Sheila, what's your thoughts? Why do you think Judaism is so caring about details?
It teaches like responsibility, and if you could do like smaller things, then you should be able to be responsible for larger facets of your life.
No, that's true too. You have a lot of parents who will say if you can make your bed, that's starting you off on the right track of having an organized day. So yeah, that's a good point too. Okay, so let's read big idea number 1. Sheila, if you'd like to read what we have pulled up on the screen.
Halakha takes into account the natural tendencies of a human being and understands that strong values are not enough to control a person's raging temptation and varied emotional states. Only strict discipline and a detailed regimen of specific actions will keep a person committed to the path of goodness. We cannot rely on inspiration alone, for it can easily expire. What's more, a broad, which with many practical, primitive details, is highly democratic in that it makes religion accessible to everyone.
Very good. So this is the 2 ideas which we're going to mention in point number 1 about why we need those details in the Jewish law, because it allows us to actually keep the inspiration alive, and it makes everyone equal, which is the beauty of Judaism. We don't say that the laws apply only to the enlightened, to the rich, to the wealthy, to a certain class or group of people. We say every Jew, whether it's Moses or whether it's a convert that just came on day number 1, the commandments apply to everyone equally the same. You don't have to be a certain type of person to have the commandments apply. So let's move on over here. And Eliyahu, we'd like to ask you these questions. Let's start with the opening question.
Okay. Opening question. I dropped my book. Okay. Why so many details? If God wanted us to live in accordance with his values, why not suffice with an articulation of those general rules? General values. Wouldn't it have made more sense for Jewish law to simply consist of a list of God's values, such as be kind, love your neighbor, and love God? I'm supposed to answer?
No, so we're gonna explain the question, but read the next point.
Okay.
Yeah, till the end of the page.
Judaism versus the others. Details, details, details. This is, in fact, generally speaking, one of the major differences between Judaism and other religions. Jewish law is extremely detailed and action-focused, while other world religions focus on general values and religious emotions, which makes sense. It's far more intuitive to think of religion as a set of values rather than an intricate system of nitty-gritty laws. Shouldn't Jewish law focus more on meaning and purpose? Let's take a practical example from the body of Jewish law where we will see the different perspectives come into sharp focus. Professor Chaim Simon is law professor at Villanova University School of Law. He was once invited to speak to a church about how rabbis read and understand the Bible, the foundation of Jewish law. He began his lecture by discussing the first commandment, be fruitful and multiply.
So before we'll pull up his text, which is beautiful, how it explains the different views on how we look at details, let me just pull up over here the few slides for this class so we can have a visual on some of the points we mentioned. So this class is, in short, about action, why Judaism is focused on action. Here we have this question about Shabbat and toilet paper. A lot of people are surprised to hear this, but on Shabbat, we're actually not supposed to use preferably not supposed to use this type of toilet paper because one of the prohibited laws on Shabbat is tearing on a dotted line, meaning you would pre-dot a line, write exactly how you want something cut, and then you would cut it so, based on someone that's working with materials or someone that's working with wood. So toilet paper, ideally one should use a tissue box, or if they have the ones that dispense one at a time, like those smaller packs, or some people will cut these rolls before, just take a knife and cut it down the center. So it sounds a little excessive. However, why is Judaism so focused on those details? Why not just say, okay, I don't care which toilet paper you use, doesn't make a difference. Now, just to point out, there are those that say that if one does not have another form of toilet paper, they can use these, just don't tear it specifically on the dotted lines, the perforated lines, just tear it randomly at any spot. This way you're not following the pattern that was supposed to be torn. So this is what we would say. This is what Elia, you mentioned. I would say that God wants us to be nice, love your neighbor, love God. However, God is very specific about boxes to wear on your head, say certain prayers after using the bathroom, not to sit in your parents' chair. One might say, well, come on, I'm being respectful to my parents. I love them. I honor them. I drive them in the car. I pick them up when they need. Do you think it really matters if I sit in their chair, if I don't sit in their chair? So our first commandment in the Torah is be fruitful and multiply. Let's see the Jewish version and how to read this. So Sheila, if you'd like to read this text, yeah, you could read it as back and forth, or you could just skip the names of who's saying what, because everybody could follow along.
Okay. I told the group that Talmudic rabbis maintain that the first commandment for generations was to be fruitful and multiply. The group nodded in approval, and I sensed we were then on the same page. Next, I asked a simple, almost inevitable question from the Talmudic perspective, but one deeply foreign to my audience. How many? How many what? How many children? What do you mean, how many children? And I realized that we reached a bit of a brick wall, so I backed up. Do you believe the Bible is the word of God that expresses his will? Yes. Do you believe you have to follow it? Yes. Well then, how do you know when you have done it? How do you know when you have been sufficiently full? Blank stares from the audience. Sorry. It was clear that the last question produced some discomfort. I proceeded to explain that when the rabbis read the Bible, they looked to put it into practice, to operationalize it. Thus, most of the rabbis' questions in the rabbinic discourse as a whole looks to define the nature and scope of various provisions in the Bible and Talmud. When the rabbis read the verse, to be fruitful and multiply, they immediately attempt to define the properties and scope of this commandment or mitzvah. Here, the issue boils down to how many children one is required to bear in order to fulfill the biblical commandment. This seemed to clarify the issue to the assembled audience. I explained that the rabbis assumed that producing 2 children would satisfy the biblical duty of fruitfulness. This is, however, a debate. The school of Shammai holds that the children must be 2 males, while the school of Hillel finds that the 2 need to be a male and 1 a female.
Okay, yeah, and continue with this. This is continuing the discussion.
Oh, did more?
Yeah, whatever you see on the screen now. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. In the Talmud's way of thinking, this is only the beginning. The tradition continues to wonder, if one remarries, must he or she have children again? Is the obligation binding upon the man, the woman, or the woman, or the marriage? Are children from an adulterous or illicit relationship counted? If the children are incapable of reproducing, do they count? What if the children are capable of reproducing at birth but sustain genital defects later in life? Then I asked, let me hear how, in your tradition, you reason toward the answers. Surely you want to fulfill the word of God. So how do you know when you have done it? The most obvious and telling response was the ensuing silence. The uneasy quiet indicated that the group had never thought to break down this question into the level of details found in the Talmud. The command was not conceptualized as binding or operational in quite the direct way the rabbis assumed. While all agreed that the biblical directives are binding in the churchgoer's mind, the biblical commandments took on a less concrete form. The assembled group did not interpret the verses as having the same degree of presentness and immediately as assumed by the rabbis. The answer clustered into a few categories. Some thought it was not a command to individuals as much as a charge to society as a whole, such that the verse did not direct individuals to undertake specific acts. The majority, however, responded with something like, as many as you can handle, or read the Bible and let the Holy Spirit guide you to the correct answer, or discuss it with your pastor and other members of the faith community in order to reach the conclusion that is right for you.
Very good. So what are the different ways, let's next slide. What are the different ways of interpreting be fruitful and multiply? So we have Jewish scholars who will get into the nitty-gritty details and say, if I wanted to make this into law, how many pages would there be in secular law to describe this law? Versus other religions say, well, it's just a nice idea from God. God doesn't care if you had 1 child, 2 children, as long as society in general has what type of child, if the child has to reproduce other children, if you get remarried, you have to have, and many other laws, including how do we know that 2 is enough? That itself is a discussion in the Talmud. And do you have to have more than 2? So these details and discussions show how we are very focused on taking every idea and practicalizing it, making it practical, making it something that we have to attain. We have to figure out exactly how do I do it. Elia, what do all these pictures have in common? So I'll tell you what these are. This is a piece of jewelry. chip inside of a computer and a book?
They're all like man-made.
Right. Well, that's true too. But what we're focusing on is the details. Notice how all of these are very detail oriented. All of these have very intricate aspects to it. The jewelry and its design, what makes it so unique. Computer, of course, is the most detailed. And then the book. You can't just dot down a bunch of letters. You have to be very detailed into which letters you're putting, which sentences, which paragraphs and pages. What shows us is that something that's important has a lot of details to it. And only with the details will you reach your ultimate goal. Without the details, everything breaks down. Let's see over here. Let's read this story and then I'll show you that picture again. Yeah, if you'd like to read this story, sorry.
In the 1960s, Danish architect Arne Jacobsen designed a new college campus in Oxford, England. New content with designing the building. Oh, not content with designing the building. He went
Right.
on to
Not content. He wasn't happy enough.
Content. I don't know why I read it like content. He went to design the cutlery and dishes to be used in the dining hall and supervised the planting of every shrub in the college garden. When he asked why he went to such great lengths, he replied to the words of another architect, "God is in the details."
Very good. So let's pull up, this is his design. So you see, he quoted God is in the details. What he's trying to say is that what makes a beautiful building or a beautiful room or a beautiful college is in the details. Don't say, well, details aren't important. No, that's exactly what makes it unique. Ideas can sometimes be very simple. I have a great idea I want to give. Let's use an example. We're not getting into the politics side of it, but let's just use idea of healthcare for all, right? It's a very great idea, simple. However, everyone that studies what goes on in the state and the Senate and the presidency and all the politics involved understands that the application of this idea is extremely intricate. It's extremely detailed, something that is difficult for us to apply because there's so many details involved. And Sheila, if you'd like to read, detail is a byproduct of application. Read this paragraph.
We understand that halakha is uniquely detailed and action-oriented. So our question is simply why? Why isn't Jewish law just about expressing general values and religious emotions? Why isn't the application of the morals and values left to the individual? Why can't each of us decide for ourselves how to Jewish values and ethics?
Right. So let's use this law for an example of, let's say, healthcare for all. So this application would need to address questions like, who will provide the healthcare? Will it be the government directly, or will the government reimburse private insurers? What income level is considered needy that they need healthcare for all? Will they cover someone that has a higher income but a greater medical expense? Meaning he needs it because his condition requires more care. What happens if he lives in a wealthier neighborhood, but in portion to his income, he actually doesn't have that extra money in order to provide his own healthcare? What exactly will healthcare cover? Will it cover dentistry? Will it cover cosmetic surgery? Or what happens if someone's physically deformed? Are they entitled to cosmetic surgery? So these details we can understand are taking an easy idea, but when applying it in detail, we have to discuss everything, and it could be very complex in order to get down to the bottom line of it. So too, when it comes to studying God's ways, yes, the ideas sound nice, and we could just say, of course, love God, celebrate holidays, and appreciate the culture. However, if we truly want to connect with these ideas, we all understand that we have to get down to the nitty-gritty details in order to actually make it happen. So Elia, if you'd like to read discipline.
Discipline. God understood that to control the beast in mankind, general values of love and kindness would not be enough. These values lack form and shape and can therefore be ignored and misinterpreted. Rather, in order to get people to live in a certain way, God knew that he would have to give very specific and practical guidance in the form of mitzvot. Rabbi Soloveitchik forcefully argues this idea, pointing to the passive bystander who witnessed the atrocities of the Holocaust and did nothing, even though they certainly subscribed to general ideas of being nice in their personal lives.
Okay, and read text number 2. This is his quote.
Religiosity lacking the elements that obligate man to perform particular actions cannot conquer the beast in man. Subjective faith lacking commands and laws, even if it dresses itself up as love of God and man, cannot stand fast if it contains to explicit commands to do good deeds, to fulfill specific commandments. The terrible Holocaust of World War II proves this. To all those who speak of love stood silent. All those who speak of love stood silent and did not protest. Many of them even took part in extermination of millions of human beings.
Right. So we see if there's not going to be specific details, we're not necessarily going to make it happen. Because these people were all told, of course, we love and we care and we believe in God, but there was no specific commandment in their mind of standing up when someone else is doing an injustice, or other commandments that we have in order to make sure that one is not doing a sin, and therefore it just happened. If we use other examples in today's politics, it'll be easy for us to understand. Many people will say that America or the government has a obligation to feed the hungry, provide everyone with free college education. We're not getting into the sides of the politics, but let's assume if one was trying to implement free college education or creating job opportunities for the unemployed, subsidized housing for the underprivileged or the needy, lower crime rates in big cities by 50%, or preventing politicians from abuse of power. These are ideas which are easy to throw off the tongue, but extremely difficult to implement. How are you going to lower crime by 50%? How are you going to stop politicians from abusing power? How exactly do you plan on subsidizing or providing housing for the needy and making sure that the system is sustainable, operational, going to the right people, not being abused, misused? So every task that we want to do, even the most lofty, good sounding task like be kind, if it's not discussed in detail, what does it mean to be kind? What do I have to give to another? Oh, if I make money, I have to give 10%. That's a very defined detail versus when one just says, be kind and share it. Let's read a story here, bringing out this point of how one can have ideas, but yet live a different life. And Sheila, if you'd like to read the story.
The story is told of a professor of ethics at Harvard who was engaging in extremely immoral behavior. Harvard's Board of Governors called the professor in and rebuked him. My private affairs have nothing to do with my professional duties, he explained calmly. But you are a professor of ethics, one of the board members pointed out. I was a professor of geometry at Cambridge, the professor answered, but the Board of Governors never asked me why I was not a triangle.
So what do we see the problem with this professor? The Torah, how does Jewish law combat this attitude? The Torah totally disagrees and says, if you're going to be a Torah observant, if you're going to be someone that's following God's ways, it better be apparent in the way you behave. So let's understand why sometimes someone teaching ethics will behave in an inappropriate way, because inspiration alone is not enough. This is where the details get in. Let's read this first, and then we'll go on to the next step. Elia, if you'd like to read over here till the bottom.
Inspiration. Starting with inspiration is not enough.
Yeah.
Inspiration is not enough. Some will argue that inspiration is enough, that if we're sufficiently excited about something will get it done without requiring a full rule book of instructions. Whether it's writing a novel, composing a symphony, directing a film, or building $1 billion business, success can only come from hard work, focused attention, and daily rituals without relying on idealism to motivate.
Very good. So let's understand this a little better. Let's pull up over here our next slide, and I'll ask you guys a question. What do you think are the four most popular New Year's resolutions that people take? Elia, if you could give me two, and Sheila, if you could give me two.
Work out more and eat
Very
healthy.
good. Very good. Okay. Sheila, do you have any more?
Saving money,
Yeah.
losing
Okay.
weight,
Right.
work harder.
Correct. Very good. So let's look over here. Look at this sort of funny but truthful New Year's resolution this guy has. So notice the different color inks for different years. In 2009, he used a black pen. Then in 2010, a blue. And in 2012, he used a green one. So in 2009, he writes lose weight. And then the next year, he had to write more. And then again, notice how there's a problem here. Every year he says, get fit, or next year, give up alcohol, or give up cigarettes, or any other addiction that people have, find a job, and then already it turns into, first it starts off with, let's say, be nicer to my wife, and by the time 2 years come around, it's already my ex-wife. So it sounds funny, or you could read these little ones on the side. What is the problem, you would say, as to why New Year's resolutions don't happen? Sheila, what do you say? What would be the main?
Say this again.
What would be the main reason why New Year's resolutions, do you think, don't actually happen?
Because you're not really motivated. I mean, it sounds good when you say it, but when you think about it, you don't do it.
Right.
I mean,
So,
you need motivation. You could do a New Year's resolution anytime, but if you're not
Right.
motivated, it doesn't work.
So actually, studies show that even with motivation, people are still having a hard time. They really mean it in the beginning, and yet they're struggling. And the answer is simple, because it's not detail oriented. They have good motivations, but it wasn't specific. Let's watch this short clip over here where the guy explains, he breaks it down into easy words to remember. Oh, I'm sorry there. 1 second.
January, that's why New Year's resolutions rarely work. In January, you can't find an empty Stairmaster at the gym, but by March, it's a ghost town. Where did all those people go? Well, we don't need an in-depth Dateline investigation to figure out what happened here. They didn't set smart goals. Goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-sensitive. Setting a resolution to lose weight won't cut it. But if you set a smart goal to drop 20 pounds by March 15th by going to the gym 3 times a week and cutting out milkshakes, you'll be more likely to succeed.
So what we see is that inspiration, as much as people will argue inspiration is enough, we know from actual life experience, inspiration is not enough. Many people are inspired to lose weight, and they actually keep getting inspired every year to lose the same weight since they never lost it. Why is that? Because there was no structured, what time of every day am I losing this weight? What exactly am I doing? Do I drop everything when that time comes in order to make it happen? The answer is, if it's a yes, then it will happen. Every successful person was extremely on top of their schedule, very detail oriented, with making sure that what they want to happen actually happens. Let's look over here at just a famous basketball player, even though it seems like we don't have any big basketball fans here, but just
shooting the 3 with 2 in trouble. Kobe Bryant to take over. Bryant for 3, puts it in. Kobe Bryant.
So no one has become a great basketball player by sitting around just shooting balls once every day. And he said, oh, it's just a given talent to me by the one above. I'm just really good at basketball. The really good players were working really hard, very focused on what time am I getting to the gym? How long am I being at the gym for? Am I shooting to the hoop till I get in 400 shots and until then I don't go home? That's what makes him a good player. And he'll tell you that that's the only way someone can ever grow is by not letting one off easy, but by working really hard, very detailed and specific as to what exactly I'm here to do. Right? So if I ask this question, what percentage is love of the game and what percentage is discipline? The answer is most of it is going to be discipline. When one is disciplined about it, it's going to happen. Eating healthy, writing a resolution, I'll eat healthy, is worthless. It's not even worth the paper you wrote it on. But if someone writes down, I am going to cut out milkshakes, I'm not going to order any more milk. Let's say for their diet, milk, I'm not anything against milkshakes, but they write specifically, I'm going to start ordering every week a box of apples and I'm going to finish it. I'm eating every day for dinner asparagus and I'm going to order that. That is more likely to actually come about because there's a specific time. Whether it's writing a novel, composing a symphony, directing a film, or building $1 billion business, success can only come from hard work that's focused on attention to detail, daily rituals, without relying on idealism to motivate. If we'll use over here a short video clip to bring out, here we have, we'll skip this part just because it takes long in the class to go through that, but just a short clip over here.
Yitzhak Perlman is one of the finest violinists alive today. Once, after a concert in Vienna, a man approached him and said, "You were magnificent, absolutely amazing." Perlman thanked him and smiled. The man continued, "All my life, I've had such a love of the violin. I've heard some of the greatest violinists alive today, but none have performed as beautifully as you did tonight. I would give my whole life to play the violin like you did tonight." To this, Yitzhak Perlman answered, "I have." In life, most of us have some dream, aspiration, or goal. Sometimes we even feel we give our whole life to become that type of special person or to achieve that worthy goal. But that's the difference. While some of us are just letting the sand in life's hourglass pass, others are actually working to make that difference. Which will you? Yitzhak Perlman.
So what do we see from that video? I'll use a personal example that I experienced and you'll be able to relate to. When it comes to Shabbat, Shabbat is something that comes every week on clock. Not once did it fail. Every Friday night when the sun goes down, it begins. Whether you're ready or not, whether you're home, whether you're on a plane or any situation you're in, there are no excuses, no exceptions, no pushing it off. It happens. By doing that, we guarantee that one will be ready and will actually celebrate Shabbat. Imagine if God said, guys, I want you to keep Shabbat one day a week, but you just choose which day is available. And if one week doesn't work, just keep the next week 2 days, or it's fine, just work it out on your own schedule. How often do you think we would actually force ourselves to disconnect for an entire day, 25 hours, from work, technology, phones, and everything else? Most people would say, yeah, I'll do it later. When there's no deadlines, we don't actually make it happen. So therefore, the more specific we are about the laws of Shabbat, it forces us, whether we like it or not, it's something that's like against our will, but for our will. It's like school is against your will, for your will, or having very strict rules that you don't appreciate, but ultimately you do appreciate. The laws of the Torah are there to force us to make sure that we're behaving and acting appropriately. And even if you're not interested, you're forced to do it because ultimately this is the way you should be. This guy is having a hard time enjoying his vacation because he's still working. Sometimes people could come back from a vacation feeling worse than they were before they went on the vacation. Because the vacation was no real vacation, they were working. And the only difference was that they switched locations from where they're working. They used to work from their office. Now they were working from a sunny beach, but they were working just as hard. Shabbat forces us to spend time specifically with family and recharge. And therefore, as pathetic as the laws may sound, it actually is for our benefit. And we can come to appreciate and say, you know, it's good that Shabbat just comes at that time, whether I'm ready or not, because that makes me be ready. That makes me just do it. Just get into it. Don't wait for everything to be set up. And Elia, if you'd like to read this question.
Where does Jewish law apply? An answer?
Yes, we have over here a synagogue on the left, or you have a supermarket on the right. Where do we think Jewish law applies? Does it only apply in specific locations to specific people, or does it apply everywhere? So let's read. You'll have it over here. Right. So let's read this inside over here. And here. Democratic Judaism.
Wait, should I read?
Yeah, if you could, to answer that question from this screen, from where does Judaism apply? So read the Democratic Judaism.
Democratic Judaism. There is another important theme inside the practicality of Judaism. The same way that halacha applies to every place and is relevant to every aspect of life, it is relevant to and inclusive of every person, not just the philosopher or scholar. It is extremely democratic. Mitzvot are not exclusive. The Torah cares about each and every individual and gives us each an avenue to connect with God. Accordingly, the Torah focuses on specific behaviors that are attainable to anyone. General values, moral ideals, and religious fervor might not only work for a select few who are more spiritually sensitive. Might only work. But the average person will find it hard to simply love God without any concrete guidance. It is the focus on behaviors that make halacha accessible and doable for everybody.
Good. And Sheila, if you could read this quote, which brings out this point.
The rabbi, whether in terms of study or practice, is the possession of the entire Jewish community. The thrust of halakha is democratic from beginning to end. The halakha declares that any religion that confines itself to some remote corner of society, to an elite sect or faction, will give rise to destructive consequences that far outweigh any punitive gains. If you desire an exoteric democratic religiosity, get thee unto the empirical earthly life, the life of the body with all its 248 organs and 365 sinews. Do not turn your attention to an exalted spiritual rooted in the abstract world.
Very good. So his point that he's saying here is that if religion would be about lofty spiritual ideas, it would only be for select few, and the masses would be left out. But the practical and primitive actions that halacha mandates, the fact that we are very focused on the specifics, that is equally accessible to everyone, thus ensuring that it's a religion that will be attainable and connects with everyone, regardless of their level of intellect, knowledge, or past experience. So, summary of idea number one is two basic fundamental points as to why we're focused on detail. Number one, it actually makes sure that it's going to happen. If you don't have specific details, it won't happen, like New Year's resolution. And number two, it makes it equal for everyone. Every Jew can equally achieve and attain this type of connection with God because it's just about the action. Moving on to section number two, as to why Judaism is focused on action. Again, we're still answering the same question. And this one is going to explain how this makes us feel more connected to God. And Sheila, if you'd like to read the introduction.
In the previous section, we explored the advantage of a highly detailed practical regimen of halakha, in that it ensures continued commitment. We will now explore an added benefit to the repeated behaviors of halakhic observance. They impact a person's thought patterns and beliefs more than abstract explanations of values.
Very good. And over here, fake it till you make it. If you could read that part.
I should read that?
Yeah.
Oh, fake it till you make it. Repeated behavior impact a person's thoughts, patterns, and beliefs more than abstract explanations of values and truths.
Very good. So this is another element of why Jewish law is very focused on the details, is because it's aware of how human psychology works. Our behavior impacts our thoughts, emotions, and it impacts our values. So if God wants us to educate, if he wants to educate us to think, believe, and deeply feel certain values, God was well aware that Jewish law will require repeated behaviors in order to reinforce those values that we should believe. Let's look over here in this quote. I'm going to say it outside just to cut a little bit on the time. He says, you might ask, why are there so many laws to remember the commandment of leaving Egypt? There's over a dozen laws in the Torah that are connected with leaving Egypt. We have the Passover laws, of course. Sukkot is connected with leaving Egypt. Even Shabbat has an aspect connected to the fact of leaving Egypt. Every day we have to say the Shema to remember that God took us out of Egypt. Why so many laws? You might ask, why not just one time? Say one law, remember that God took us out of Egypt, he took us out of slavery, and that's it. So he explains that if you would do something once, it wouldn't affect you as much as something that you do continuously again and again. Because after one's actions comes his emotions and his feelings. By one behaving a certain way consistently, that actually makes him start feeling the same way. So he says if someone is righteous, but they behave inappropriately, they'll start actually feeling also inappropriately. If someone is inappropriate, but he forces himself to behave appropriately, he'll actually start feeling the appropriate feelings as well. So therefore, the reason why there's so many details is because that's the best way to start feeling that one should actually have that connection to God. It's like swimming. Get into the pool and you'll start learning how to swim. Do the actions and that will lead to feeling that connection. Just like in a relationship. Don't wait to feel the relationship and then act. By behaving in a way of love to another, that will actually build the love and make the love come as well. So bottom line, what we behave and what we act upon, what we're going to have our daily behavior includes certain aspects that is going to impact our personality. That's going to be the way we are. We could see it in a simple example of the way one gets dressed. When one puts on certain outfits, it starts having them behave a certain way. A clown puts on clown clothing, he starts behaving like a clown. Someone puts on scary clothing, they start behaving to everybody in a scary way. We think that it's fake, we think that it's just a show, but bottom line, we start feeling that way because of the clothing we're putting on. If that's what happens with just clothing, how much more so when it comes to action? Start behaving in the way you want to feel, and you'll start feeling that way too. Let's look at an example over here from a famous approach in therapy, which we'll call, so here we have just our behavior impacts our thoughts, emotions, and values. So behave a certain way and you'll start feeling that way. And let's compare this to cognitive behavioral therapy. This form of therapy is exactly aligned in this idea where the cognitions, the way one thinks, the way one processes thoughts, as well as the way one behaves will impact their emotional state. So if one is not feeling properly, they're feeling something wrong, by starting to process the way they think differently and starting to behave differently, that will change the way they feel. Let's use to read this text. Elia, if you'd like to read text number 5.
A CBT technique known as behavioral activism encourages the individual to create structured routine of behavior and through doing so break free of the cycle that has reinforced negative emotions. The notion that positive change is regulated through the consistent and deliberate performance of certain pre-planned behaviors is found in the writings of many classic Jewish ethical works. Further, the important Jewish work Sefer HaChinuch, Book of Education, teaches know that a person is influenced in accordance with his actions. His heart and thoughts follow after his deeds in which he is occupied.
Very good. So this is the important quote that we had from the last source that I said outside, that one is influenced by his actions. And let's read from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs explaining why the nitty-gritty details of Jewish law. Sheila, if you'd like to read text number 6.
Whoops, okay. Let me recommend to you, Ruth, the spate of recent books of Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers to Matthew Syed's Bounce on what makes great people great. What is it that some have and the rest of us don't, whether in sport, literature, music, or science? It's a key question, and there are some fascinating stories on the way to an answer. Syed, for example, tells us that there was once a street in Reading that contained more young table tennis champions than the rest of Britain put together. Syed should know he was one of them. Then there was the Hungarian Laszlo Polgar, who decided even before getting married that his children would become chess champions. Eventually, he had 3 daughters, and they did all become chess playing stars. Clearly, then, genius can't all be in the genes. There is no reason to suppose that a table tennis gene suddenly appeared at a particular time and place at Berkshire. The answer turns out to be the neuroscientific equivalent of the old joke. A tourist stops a taxi driver and asks, "How do you get to the Royal Festival Hall?" The taxi driver replies, "Practice, lady, practice." Which is what champions do. They simply put in more hours than anyone else. The magic number is 10,000 hours. That roughly 10 years of deep practice is what it takes to reach the top in almost any field.
Okay, and continue here.
None of these authors, as far as I know, has applied their findings to religion, but they have huge implications for the very thing you asked about, Ruth, ritual. People tend to think that what differentiates the religious people from their secular counterparts is that they believe in different things. But that is less than half the story. Religious people behave distinctively. They engage in ritual. They do certain things like prayer over and over again. Ritual is a religious equivalent of deep practice. All great achievements require ritual. That, wrote Moses Maimonides, is the purpose of most of the commandments. Repetition creates deeply embedded habits. Prayer engenders gratitude. Daily charities, giving makes us generous. Each of the Judaism's thou shalt nots teaches us self-control.
Very good. So his point over here is very focused on the fact that bottom line, it's the actions that one takes that's actually what makes him different. Religious people don't mean I believe in something different. It means I do certain things. God understands the best way to shape someone is by the way they do things. Let's see over here. If you were to describe Jewish ritual compared to these other professions, what is the most encompassing verse in the Torah? Which brings out exactly this point we're going to see in a moment. What if I were to ask you, Elia, what would you say is the verse in the Torah that would summarize everything in the Torah? If you wanted to say one verse, gives you the conclusive bird's eye view. I'll give you a hint. It's a very difficult one that you wouldn't guess. So let's see what exactly is that verse. Let's read over here in this text. Elia, if you'd like to read. Ben Zoma says.
Okay. Oh. Ben Zoma says, we have found a more inclusive verse, and it is Shema Israel, Hear O Israel. Ben Nanas says, we have found a more inclusive verse, and it is love your neighbor as yourself. Shimon Ben Pazi says, we have found a more inclusive verse, and it is the first lamb you shall sacrifice in the morning, and the second lamb you shall sacrifice in the evening. Rabbi Ploni stood up and said, the halacha is in accordance with Ben Pazi.
So they have here a disagreement between the sages. One says to believe that God is one is the most inclusive verse. Another says to love your neighbor. The third one says a very strange verse, that one lamb should be sacrificed in the morning and one in the evening. So here we get to our slide, and the question is, why is the halacha, the final ruling according to Ben Pazi, which says that it's one lamb in the morning, one lamb in the evening? What's special about that verse? What do you think? Elia or Sheila, do you know why would the law be like Ben Pazi, that the most important verse or the most inclusive verse in the Torah is a lamb should be sacrificed in the morning and a lamb in the evening? So let's read over here from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. He explains. And Sheila, if you'd like to read the meaning.
The meaning of Ben Pazi's statement is clear. All the high ideals in the world, the human person as God's image, belief in God's unity, and the love of neighbors, count for little until they are turned into habits of action that become habits of the heart. We can all recall moments of insight and epiphany when we suddenly understood what life is about, what greatness is, and how we would like to live. A day, a week, or at most a year later, the inspiration fades and becomes a distant memory, and we are left as we before, unchanged. Judaism greatness is that it gave space to both prophet and priest, to inspirational figures on the one hand, and on the other, daily routines, the halakha, that take exalted visions and turn them into patterns of behavior that reconfigure the brain and change how we feel and who we are.
So the reason why the halacha is like that sage, which says one in the morning, one in the evening, is because the best thing one can do to change their life is consistency. To do it day in, day out, every single day, whether it's saying the Shema, praying to God, thanking Him, that is what the Torah is coming to accomplish. There are many people that have great ideas when they want to talk about it, but it doesn't affect their daily life, and they're missing the point. What good do all these magnificent philosophical ideas have to do if it didn't actually make you into a better person where daily you're doing the right thing? So the point of Judaism is to get one to do the actions that they're supposed to do. That's the best sign that one is fulfilling their mission. Let's read a story that brings out about how actions affect one's behavior. And Elia, if you'd like to read the story.
A few days before her wedding, a young bride came to see the Rebbe for a blessing. No sooner than she began speaking did she burst into tears. Sobbing, she told the Rebbe that she wanted to call off the wedding. Why is that? The Rebbe asked. I have a terrible temper, the girl explained. I have no patience. While we were dating, my groom never saw this side of me. But once we're married, it won't take long for him to realize that I'm very different from the woman he dated. Instead of marrying and getting divorced, I'd rather not get married to begin with. The Rebbe smiled at her and said, I'm going to tell you something. The Almighty is going to bless you with many children, and the children will teach you patience. And until you start having children, you should do volunteer work in a hospital, preferably with children. And that will also help you become patient with people, and your temper will not be a problem.
So what do we see from this story? That human nature is full of limitations. But if we work on repeated positive behavior, it will eventually impact our very nature. It will transform us into better people. That's why commandments, details are so important, because it forces us to start behaving a certain way, which impacts our emotions, our thoughts, and our patterns. Let's move on to section number 3. And Sheila, if you'd like to read.
Actions make a difference. Actions and deeds are the only way to practically fix the world and reshape it in God's image. Values, thoughts, and emotions are important, but they do not make a real world impact. It is only through living these truths that we can change society and the world around us.
Very good. So this is the third reason why Judaism is focused on action, and that is because if we want to fix the world, having epiphanies is not going to fix anything. You got to actually get your feet on the ground, get the boots moving, and that's the way we're actually going to change something. And Elia, if you'd like to read the slogan, and then that and followed by text 10.
Oh, the slogan "Just Do It" has worked wonders to sell athletic apparel, so it's no surprise that long before sneakers were invented, it was already working wonders to make the world a godlier place. Once again, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks expresses this idea in a book called A Letter in the Scroll, Understanding Our Jewish Identity and Exploring the Legacy of the World's Oldest Religion. Rabbi Sacks spends a large section of the book describing what he sees as Judaism's primary inspirational and aspirational general values. He then asks, it is helpful in this context to contrast Judaism as a life of faith with the civilization of ancient Greece and its supreme expression, namely philosophy. Philosophy represents truth thought, whereas Judaism represents truth lived. Greece is the paradigm of chachma. The search for knowledge is what it is. Judaism is the religion of Torah, which is why conventional knowledge of what ought to be, which is to say conventional, convental knowledge of what ought to be. So,
No, go on. Yeah, it's fine.
Like the convent, because I was really confused. I was reading that wrong. So though Judaism is a set of beliefs, it is not a creed in the conventional sense. Instead, it is a series of truths and of truths that become true only in virtue of the fact that we have lived them. In living them, we turn the ought into the is. We make a fragment of perfection in an imperfect world and create a living truth, a life of faith, by observing mitzvot, following the commandment, or more precisely, bringing God, the truth of the world that ought to be, into the world that is. We bring heaven down to earth.
So it's only by us living the way God wants us to live on a daily, consistent basis, where we do the actions, that we can truly impact the world and make a difference. A religion that's focused, which a lot of religions are focused on beliefs, general values, spiritual ideas. What are they changing? They're only changing spiritual areas, but they're not changing the practical world. We're trying to make this world, the physical place, a better place. So therefore, if we want to impact physical, we got to act with physical. Let's read text number 11. Sheila, if you'd like to read.
And it works. Throughout the ages, Jews were known for their strong families and communities, their passion for study and the life of the mind, their commitment to helping the poor, the needy, and oppressed. Somehow in oppression, they kept their dignity, and persecution their hope. In some of the darkest moments known to man, they stayed human and free. Judaism led ordinary people to lead extraordinary lives.
Very good. So how did you make that one, even while they're oppressed, even while they're going through a hard time, live appropriate life? Because we were always detail oriented in physical things. We had to keep Shabbat, we had to keep the holidays, Passover, to pray a certain amount of times a day, to do this blessing and that blessing, this ritual and that law and this prohibition and that positive commandment. By getting it so involved in our life, it allows us to live with it in all circumstances. So it's a living experience. It's not ideas that are just thought about once in a while, but something that impacts our experience in every way, shape, and form. There was once a rabbi that has a scholar comes to him, and the scholar was learning about Maimonides. Maimonides has a book of Jewish law and a book called The Guide to the Perplexed. The Guide to the Perplexed is a book answering questions about God. So it's more of a philosophy book. And this scholar asks the rabbi, which book is more important? Do you think his book of Jewish law is more important or the book of philosophy? So the rabbi says, of course, who the Maimonides was really, what his main focus was, the book of Jewish law. That's where it all boils down to. The philosophy is just there to answer questions that one might have in order to get him to read the other book and do the actual commandments. But just to read the philosophy book and memorize questions that you don't even have, that is futile. That's pointless, because why would you want to just question yourself things that you don't even have? It's only there if you do have those questions and you want to be able to answer them so you can go on with fulfilling what you should be doing, then answer them. But if it doesn't bother you, just move on to actually performing the way one should be. Let's see over here this slide, which brings out this point in a story. So that explains how, bottom line, the action is what's most important. And let's look over here as to what is the reason that action is most important. Elia, if you'd like to read text number 12. And this is on page 82.
Okay. Oh, do you want me to start from the very top?
Yeah, I guess you could start from in the Hasidic literature, yeah.
Okay. Dira betachtonim. Oh, a home for God in this world. In Hasidic literature, the notion of action impacting the world around us takes much broader and cosmic implications. In fact, doing practical mitzvot with physical objects is argued to be the ultimate purpose of the world's creation. In this book, Likutei Amarim Tanya, the first Chabad Rabbi, Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, cites a midrash that states that the ultimate purpose of creation is for God to descend from the heavens and to dwell in our world. Text 12. It is well-known rabbinic statement that the purpose of creation of this world is that God desired to have a home in the lower world. How can we make this world a home for God?
Very good. So how do we perform it? That's exactly where the physical commandments come in. What are we trying to do? Make a physical world a home for God. So we got to get physical with the world. The more physical actions we do, the better we're completing our mission. And Sheila, if you'd like to read text 13.
Therefore, when a person occupies himself in the Torah, his neshama, which is his divine soul, with its two innermost garments only, namely the power of speech and thought, are observed in the divine light of God and are united with it in a perfect union. However, in order to draw the light of the Shekinah also over his physical body, the person must fulfill the practical commandments, which are performed by the body itself. For then the very energy of the body itself, which is engaged in this action, is absorbed in the divine light and in his will, and is united with him in a perfect union.
So when you have
Can I
just
ask you
study,
a question?
yeah, sure.
Okay, what happens when somebody decides like they want to do half of it? They daven when they're supposed to, they wear yarmulkes, they go to shul, but then when Shabbos is over, they commit felonies against people. And I don't mean, against themselves. I mean real things that obviously is not in the Jewish law. What is the thought about that?
Right. So as we actually just had that earlier in the class with the professor of ethics.
Right, exactly. But he
in
did
inappropriate-
something that was a little unethical. I'm talking like they murder somebody, or they steal from poor people, or they steal from whatever. And in the meantime, see, this the problem that I have. This professor, okay, he's only embarrassed himself. Well, when religious people do things, they get arrested, and then they say, "Oh, the Jews did this."
Right. So 100% you're right that if someone is properly doing what they should, it must reflect in all their actions. So you cannot just believe God is in the synagogue and he just watches what goes on over there. And then once you leave, you could act like anyone. The whole purpose of everything you're doing, all the ideas, inspirations, and insights that you get at the synagogue is to impact your day-to-day life, your actions, interactions with others, your business dealings, your family life. So if it's not impacting, you're definitely missing a very important message. However, with that being said, that of course it's wrong and one has to perfect themselves, it shouldn't lead to one going the other extreme and saying, you know what, I'm not going to change my ways in business, so I don't want to feel like a hypocrite, so I'm not going to come to synagogue. Don't allow the fact that you're lacking in one aspect to destroy you in another aspect. Meaning just because you're struggling in an area, don't say it's okay. Understand that it's a problem, but don't allow that to stop you from doing the little good that you are doing, because ultimately each aspect is good on its own. So think of it as someone that's eating unhealthy and also they're smoking cigarettes. They shouldn't say, well, I could stop eating unhealthy and start eating healthy, but I'm not going to stop with the cigarettes. So I might as well just continue eating unhealthy, because once I'm smoking cigarettes, I might as well just also eat unhealthy. Every doctor will say, listen, if you can stop with one, even if you're not going to stop with both, of course, it's better to eat healthy and smoke cigarettes than eat unhealthy and smoke cigarettes. I'm not saying that smoking cigarettes is right. You're still destroying your body, but minimize as much as possible. So too, I would say with action, don't tell such a person, don't come to synagogue, don't even pray to God, God doesn't want to see you. We should tell him, it's great that you're doing the right thing, and we should work on bringing that inspiration or that drive for doing the right thing into other aspects as well, because that's ultimately the proper way to behave, the way God wants you to behave, that it affects your actions. Does that answer the question?
Can I just say something else?
Sure.
Okay. But there's like, I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying, but if somebody does something and it's just between, like, if you don't eat kosher food, that's between you and God. And if you don't try to force somebody else to eat that kosher food, it doesn't matter. But if somebody is religious and they're stealing and they're all over the television with yarmulkes on, and everybody goes, there goes the Jews, look what they're doing. Even though it's a very small percentage, and even though it's not, do you see that? I mean, if somebody eats not kosher, that's between that person and God. It doesn't really affect anybody else.
Well,
unless you give it to them, which that's another stupid thing. But if somebody does something that's like a big felony and it affects other Jews, do you see a difference in that?
For sure. The Jewish law says that if one sins, but it's only between him and God, then it's a problem. However, if one sins and it's public knowledge, meaning he disgraced God in public, he's making others devalue God because of the way he's behaving, then the sin is so much greater. It's called desecrating God's name in public. Because if ever, as a religious person, meaning if someone is going to commit a sin, better to take off their yarmulke and commit the sin as if they're not Jewish than to commit the sin openly displaying that they're Jewish, and now you're disgracing God's name. The Talmud says if one cannot control themselves with the sin, they should go to a place where they don't know him and commit the sin, rather than do it in a place where you're desecrating the sanctity of the community, of your life, of your family, of your neighborhood, and of the way people look at God. So definitely you're right. It doesn't mean it's allowed. It's still a sin.
Right, right. I'm
However,
not saying you should do it.
right, exactly. But doing it openly, publicly is way worse than doing it quietly, anonymously, or incognito.
Than involving other Jews.
Exactly. No, 100%, you're right. So to clarify his point over here, he's saying that in order to affect the world, one has to get involved, their body and the physical world around them. And that's why Judaism is so detail-oriented with commandments. And let's see this last text, which brings out this point about making a home in the material world. And Elia, if you'd like to read text 14.
By virtue of performing a mitzvah with a physical item, the person suffuses.
I guess it's supposed to be
I've never heard of that.
suffuses.
Suffuses?
Yeah, I think it suffuses, which is he brings down, he draws down a flood of godly light.
Oh, the person suffuses a flood of godly light from above downwards to be integrated in the material matter of the world.
So when one does a good deed, they bring down extra spirituality, godly light into this world. And Sheila, if you'd like to read text 15.
The primary goal is a home for God in the lowest realm, the world of action. This is mainly caused through actual deed. The learning is not primary, rather action is primary. Oh, that's good.
So that's a famous quote, that everything you learned is not the main thing. The main thing is to actually behave in a proper way. So action is the primary and ultimate goal. And let's just see that over here. They give you 4 examples here. So when one eats kosher, it elevates the food, the eating. Mikvah, when one keeps the laws of family purity, it elevates the intimacy. Shabbat elevates one's work. Tzedakah elevates their money, as we can see over here with the answers. So it's all about affecting our day-to-day life, our interactions, and the way one should behave. That is the purpose of the mitzvot, and because it's here to make the world a better place. Let's just see here one short clip. This is a nice song. We'll skip it just because of time constraints, but it's a nice song speaking about the soul not wanting to come down from heaven because the world is a bad place where there's a lot of corruption and sin. But then once it's in this world, when it comes time to die, the soul doesn't want to leave this world. He says, I want to continue having the opportunity of making this world a better place, of serving God down here. Let's skip that song. We'll just see the short clip. And then with that, we'll do the summary, the final review.
Imagine you go to an amusement park and the place is empty. Awesome. I've got the whole place to myself. And sure enough, there are no lines because every ride is broken. What a downer. The manager runs up to you and tells you how thrilled he is you finally arrived. Thrilled? Why? Aren't you a repairman? What? It says so on the back of your t-shirt. Ron, Ride Repairs. Many of us think this world is one big amusement park, and we're here to have fun. But the problem is that so many of the rides are broken.
And that's actually good news, because we are fixers, and we've come to this broken world to fix it.
But we need to remember that it's not a quick fix, and that's okay. Because when you know you're a fixer, you'll enjoy the opportunity for fixing. Our greatest pleasure is in living our purpose. Our life's joy is in doing our job. So find what's broken in your life, stay focused, and work at fixing it. You're a fixer.
Okay, with that, let's go to our final key points. We'll pull it up actually over here. And we'll start with, remember, I'll just run through the 3 points that we had in this class about why just do it, just doing the commandments. Why is that important? We said point number 1, it actually gets us to do it. When there's specific times, details, it makes sure that it happens. It makes, and slash, point 2 of number 1 was that it makes it equal for everyone, regardless of their level of knowledge. Big idea number 2 was that it actually makes us feel the appropriate way. Fake it till you make it. By behaving and doing the actions, it makes us start feeling the spiritual connection that we're supposed to feel. And point number 3 is that by doing the actions, we actually make the difference. If we just act spiritual, we're only changing the spiritual world. By doing physical actions, we're changing the physical world, which is the goal, the purpose of everything. So, Elia, if you'd like to read the first column on the left side.
Oh, for me, it's I guess on here. It's okay. Halacha is more focused on the mechanics of action. Other religions tend to be more focused on spiritual aspects, the values and meanings of life. The application of an abstract idea is a lot more specific and technical than the idea behind it. Inspiration is fleeting, commitment lasts, and strict discipline and specific guidelines are the only way to stay committed to actualizing an idea long term. So I guess we need like hard work and is going to like achieve our long-term goals, and intricate details like are very important because that's what makes the bigger picture. And kind of yeah.
No, very good, very good. You explained that well. Just like what makes up a beautiful book or a piece of jewelry or the computer chip is the intricate details, and what makes up a good professional in any field is being very focused on the details. Very good. Okay. And Sheila, if you'd like to read the right column.
While not everyone can appreciate or understand layers of meaning, everyone can do a simple action. Repeated behavior shapes a person's thought patterns and beliefs even more than abstract explanations. Physical actions have the greatest impact on the physical world. God wants to dwell on this physical world, not in the world of thought or ideas. Living Jewish values is action has the greatest impact on shaping culture and society in God's image.
There you go. So those are the last, the sub point, which is that it makes everyone equal. Everybody can do the action. And then the last 2 points, which is it shapes our beliefs and it shapes our emotions and feelings by doing the actions, and it impacts the world where we're actually making the world a better place. Beautiful. With that, we'll conclude this class. Thank you all very much for joining.